Let's get started. So good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is our Q4 developer meetup. So it's an opportunity for the MIT team to share kind of our thoughts on what's going on in development space. It's an opportunity for all of you to ask questions of us in terms of what's going on in development or what are our thoughts. In particular, some of the things we're going to talk about for today, we're going to be kind of expecting input over the next coming months, actually, from the community. So the first thing, though, that we wanted to talk about was the Google Summer of Code changes. So some of you have participated in Google Summer of Code. Some of you may be interested in participating in Google Summer of Code next year. Google is changing the structure of the program a little bit for the coming year. And so we are in the process of trying to understand how that's going to affect App Inventor. Susan, since you've been the lead of the Google Summer of Code work, do you want to maybe speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. So the big bombshell change from Google is that they're halving the number of hours. So previously, Google Summer of Code was most of full-time for 2 months. Now it's going to be approximately 4 weeks with an expectation of half-time, or it's going to be approximately 2 months with an expectation of half-time, and with the flexibility for students to basically apply those hours when they want to. So if you want to front load, you could do 4 full-time weeks at the beginning, or 4 full-time weeks at the end, or the 20 hours a week that is sort of the baseline. But this means that, but it is still half the number of hours, which means that we're still evaluating what projects we can suggest to applicants. Also, it's going to make it more difficult to provide more sort of ramp up time. And so we think we're probably going to have to lean pretty heavily on established contributors to the project already, or people who have proven that they can already develop in our environment. So a lot of flexibility, less work time, and a lot of things we're still figuring out on this end.
Right. So kind of one thing we might do next year is try to encourage people who are going to do Google Summer of Code or apply for Google Summer of Code, participate earlier on in the the onboarding process, right? So that way, when you get accepted, you can hit the ground running. I think pretty much all of our successful Google Summer of Code students in the past have put in at least 1 or 2 changes beforehand, before even applying. I know, Becca, you were pretty busy. And then other folks like Diego, who's at Codular, we have had people do with experience kind of making contributions. So that helps. It also kind of, we see your names, and then we see your names attached to the proposals, and so we kind of know already the level and quality of work that you do and the types of questions you ask. So that's extremely helpful for us. And then
Rebecca had made a lot of contributions, and Diego is involved with Codular, which is a fork of our code. And I don't think you need to have quite that many credentials, but it is good to be making pretty solid contributions before you apply.
And also make use of the open source group on the community site. People post questions there. If you're helping answer those questions, then we can kind of see, your level of knowledge there as well. So it's kind of like a whole package in terms of, the quality of the work that you do. So that kind of gives us a better idea of, especially given that the time frame is shortened, if we have to spend half the time ramping you up, that makes it difficult on us, and you're not going to get the same level of contribution that you might otherwise. So that's really important. The next thing I wanted to talk about, which I didn't put on the agenda originally, but I figured I'd bring it up, is the upcoming release. So we're working to try to get all of the functionality reviewed and merged that we're going to be putting into this next release. If you happen to own one of those pull requests, then expect kind of some comments in the coming weeks. We've already put a couple of them up on the test server, including the Android app bundles functionality, the new drop-down blocks that Becca did for Google Summer Code project, a number of bug fixes and things like that. This release will be a components release, so there will be a new companion. We're hoping to get in some additional functionality for extension developers, including support for AAR libraries. And native extensions. Obviously, with native extensions, you can only build those because the native code won't be in the companion app. But it should give folks some flexibility in terms of the types of extensions they can build, given the fact that you can now add these new features. A longer term thing, which was another Google Summer Code project, so it's not going into this release, but it's something we're continuing to work on, is the visible extensions functionality that was developed over the summer. There's some security implications for that, running untrusted JavaScript code in the browser that we're continuing to work on, but the hope is that we will have soon visible component extensions so that you can, as an extension developer, provide user interface elements for your extension, and they will actually work inside of the designer. You'll be able to handle, some custom logic and things like that by writing your own scripts and things like that. So that's a longer term project in terms of development that we're looking into, and we can't really necessarily put a timeline on it, but I would like to hopefully see it maybe merged by next summer. It's really just a matter of solving the security problems with it. So in the meantime, we may put up a test server. If we do, we will make an announcement on the open source community. The other thing that I wanted to give an update on is the iOS functionality, which we're continuing to work on. We have submitted a number of companion apps to Apple, and we continue to sort of address the issues that are raised up by the Apple app review team, excuse me. And so we're continuing to work on that, making progress every time we make a submission. So we're at least happy we're moving in the right direction. We're a little bit less happy about the fact that it hasn't been approved yet, but that is what it is. We're also kind of exploring other iOS functionality in terms of trying to start putting in the build infrastructure into place and kind of exploring all the technologies around that. And that's kind of happening in parallel with all of the Android development too. So it's a little bit challenging on the core team here. And so you may have noticed, some of you, that the pull request reviews are going a little bit slower than you might like, and that's because we're, in addition to all the stuff we're doing in the public, we're also doing all this private development on the iOS version until that's solid. So that's ongoing. We will be putting out a new version to test flight tomorrow, which has a number of fixes. The big thing that it has is we did a lot of work on the garbage collector to try to make it more stable. So, but of course, we're changing a very deep internal component, so that it may actually be less stable once we kind of send it out to everybody. Internally, it seems to be working better for us. So, but we've seen a lot of the crash reports that come in from test flight seem to involve the garbage collector in some way. So we're kind of hoping that this will be a better solution, and it'll make the iOS version more stable. The other thing, which we haven't really had a chance to look at yet, but it's something that people have asked about, is will we eventually have some sort of extension support for iOS? The plan is, in the long term, that the build server will support extensions. You won't be able to use them in the companion, and the reason for that is because Apple has a policy that you can't run code in an app that has been reviewed by Apple. And so we won't be able most likely to support running the extensions in the companion directly for live testing. However, our hope is that we will be able to provide a development kit, kind of like the extension template that I made public earlier this year, where you can sort of write code for iOS and bundle that as an extension, and then that would be available for compiled applications. But that's a long ways away still. The next, kind of next steps are really getting the build server done first before we even think about the extensions piece. But it is something we're thinking about, so be aware that that will be coming. And then the other thing for the iOS version is it does have a couple new components and things, and we kind of tried to stabilize some of the functionality like dictionaries and things like that. So just be aware when you're testing this new version that if there are problems, please just report them using the Google form so that we can quickly get them into the issue tracker and start working on them. MIT will be closed from December 24th until January 4th, so don't expect too much to be happening around here. We will be monitoring systems and things like that over the winter break, but for the most part, our goal is to try to take a little rest. This has been a pretty crazy year, as you all know, and we all, I think, need a break at this point on our end. So, but we appreciate everyone's cooperation on that front. Now the last official agenda item, and then I see there's been some questions in the chat, which we'll go over. So this was the UIUX refresh. So Susan, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what we've been discussing?
Yeah. So we are looking at doing some user interface refactoring in the upcoming year. And we're basically in the pre-design phase where we're trying to sort of come up with what are the most valuable features or changes or usability features that are sort of most interest to the community. So we're hoping to pretty soon solicit some feedback. I would love to know what it is that is most cumbersome about the UI for people who have developed in it, and also for people who are using it. We're hoping that this is going to also come with some more modern look and feel, and some modularity as far as being able to rearrange the UI with much less pain than it takes right now. But we are, yes, it is still going to be built on Git. We have talked about moving to React, and we're hoping that this is a change that is going to make it easier to move to React in the future. But the amount of refactoring that's going to take right now is just something we just don't have the resources for. So yeah, we are. So yes, it's still going to be in Git. It's still going to have some of the negative features of Git, but it also and of course, everything we solicit, we are not going to be able to address. We're going to have to prioritize based on feedback we receive, but we would like to receive all the feedback. We can sort it through on our end. Now, Evan, you were putting together a form to solicit feedback?
Yeah, we will be announcing that on the community. Actually, we might even put it in the splash screen. I haven't decided yet. Obviously, there are a lot of different stakeholders with App Inventor, and our primary audience has always been the education community. So we're looking to get solicitations from teachers in terms of what they think is a valuable feature, what they see students most struggling with. And so things like that will all be included. It's primarily driven by one of our grants with Hong Kong. And so they're funding this work to kind of re-envision what the user interface might look like. And kind of taking—
And that may constrain, it's going to constrain what we prioritize, because our funding source is going to have to get first pick.
Right. But it's really the first major opportunity we've had to kind of think about a vision of what could App Inventor look like for, like the next 5 years, right, in terms of usability and all that other stuff. So it's really important that we get this right. That's why we're looking for people to give us information about what works, what doesn't work. And then our kind of expectations are that we will provide opportunities for the community as we start to put together some prototypes. You can do some A/B testing to give us feedback as well. So we're hoping that there'll be a lot of kind of community participation in this process so that kind of we can get a better sense of how people can use App Inventor or how we can make App Inventor better for their use. So kind of the initial technical details of this are we're going to try to rewrite the user interface in a more structured way, having something more like XML or similarly like kind of JSX-like in terms of, if you're familiar with React, you return kind of components as these XML/HTML structures. And so we're going to do something similar. Gwt has functionality for that. And the idea is that eventually, if we wanted to move to React, a lot of that is just kind of taking the same structures and moving them over, just rewriting the Java pieces in JavaScript, or probably TypeScript. We wouldn't just write it in raw JavaScript. So things like that. There's also a ton of logic baked into the Java side of things that eventually we would have to rewrite in JavaScript if we do want to move to React. So that's something that we'll have to think about. I know this question comes up a lot with App Inventor as to why it's not written in React. Well, first off, App Inventor predates React, so that's a good starting point. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously technical debt and things like that that we have to address there. We're also thinking about kind of internally restructuring and re-architecting App Inventor a little bit on the client side, mainly because we have a bunch of experimental things that we've been developing over the years as research projects. There's things like the Alexa interface that's being actively worked on so that you can program an Alexa device, write your own custom behaviors for it and things like that. And we're looking to expand that to Google Home and other platforms. We have, there was an effort so that you could also program IoT devices like Arduinos using the blocks language. So you could connect up an Arduino and program your Arduino, and then so you'd have your program both in the Android side and in the Arduino side, rather than having to write your own sketch. And we even did some effort to make live development sort of a thing that worked there. That was a master's student project from a couple years ago. We had a student implement like a virtual reality builder. So there's just a lot of opportunities we think for expanding the functionality of App Inventor, but the way the kind of system is currently structured makes it hard to do that. So part of this work is going to be kind of restructuring things to make that easier to add and remove functionality. So we'll see how that goes. If you have ideas too about things you'd like to see, like we said, we'll be taking those into consideration as well. Usually the way this ends up working is we have a team of undergraduates at MIT who work with us, and they build sort of prototypes of ideas, and then the dev team, because there are only 4 of us, we take those prototypes and kind of make them solid so that they'll run in production. And sometimes that takes sometimes it's really easy, sometimes it's really hard, depending on the particular problem we're looking at. So. But that's kind of everything on our plate that we wanted to kind of bring up to you today. If you have questions, we're happy to take those. We'll probably hang around for a little while, at least until noon. I've got another meeting then, but let's see. Becca,
I have a question. I have a question about the iOS version.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you can give other barriers like Codular early access to the source code, because I'm pretty sure it's gonna take them a while to finish working on their iOS version. So
yeah, well, Diego, maybe you and I can talk about this offline. The big thing is we'd have to, right now, because it's not open source, MIT's technology licensing office would have to be involved. So when the lawyers come out of the woodwork, that's where it really becomes a problem. But we can, yeah, that's something we can potentially negotiate for the time being until we open source it.
Okay, thanks.
Becca has a question in the chat about the unit testing framework.
Yes, that's definitely something I want to work on. In particular, I'd like to get not only more unit testing in the system, but I'd like to get code coverage metrics as well. That's something that we really lack, and so it's very hard for us to efficiently know, whether a change is going to break functionality. In particular, I mean, that's partly our own doing, because one of our goals has always been to try to maximize backwards compatibility. And so while many of the forks of App Inventor kind of drop support for older devices, we actually still see, granted it's a small amount, it's like 1% of our users, but 1% of our users are still using devices as early as 2.1, Android 2.1. So, which is always a surprise when you see stuff that old in the system. But we capture statistics on the Rendezvous server to try to understand like the distribution of Android versions that we're seeing, and now we're actually also getting some iOS statistics as well. Although Apple gives us those for free, I guess, in the App Store Connect. But yeah, we've tried very hard, especially because schools don't always have the resources to upgrade, and we have people donate their old phones to other countries for use in rural areas and things like that can't even afford to buy devices, and so it gives them an opportunity to get access to these technologies. So it's a trade-off that we've made, and we will obviously reconsider. Like we've only updated the Min SDK once. That was a couple of years ago, and we updated it from 4 to 7, and that actually caused a bunch of problems at the time. So we're a little bit worried about upgrading it further. But
Google is by design making it increasingly hard to maintain
that too.
Android 7, and by the time we finally creep up to 14 may be almost impossible to maintain. So we have to see.
But we do put quite a bit of effort into trying to make that happen. And I mean, the other challenge too is like Google has not been particularly good about trying to get people to upgrade. I think it's gotten better, but like on iOS, it's very rare to have somebody 2 versions back. We're still trying to keep maximal compatibility there. So like when we build an iOS app, like the companion app, the minimum iOS version it targets is iOS 9, which was 5 years ago now. So even that, because like the first version we wrote it for was 9, and so we tried to keep it working on all the newer versions of iOS, but still keep it backwards compatible. So in iOS, I mean, it does do a little bit better job of allowing you to use newer APIs. Obviously they won't work on the older devices, but so far we haven't had too many problems with forwards compatibility on iOS. As you know, when we did the release over the summer, Google changed how files sort of worked or will work going forward on Android, and so that's starting to cause some issues. And App Inventor was really designed for the old model, and so trying to somehow maintain backwards compatibility with the older stuff, people who wrote projects knowing the older model and now have to deal with this new model and somehow try to make it somewhat forwards compatible has been a bit of a challenge. But we're continuing to work on that, and I've started putting together a new design for how we would interact with files, and those APIs will be public when they're merged so that every extension developer can use them as well, so that hopefully going forward, if we do need to make changes, all extensions will automatically kind of handle it. That would be nice. But right now, there's kind of like a mix of different ways of handling files in App Inventor and in Android, so it's kind of a hit and miss thing at the moment. I guess speaking about the file component and files in general, we did see a request to like try to improve or kind of expand on the API of the file component. So that's something we will probably do at some point, especially given now that there's lots of different ways to manipulate files. So kind of expect to see more on that. in the coming months. Okay, other questions. Let's see here. Abraham asks about the Google Sheets implementation schedule. Yes, I am hoping that we will have it in this coming release. We haven't put it up an AO2 test yet, but I have that other test server that people have been able to use. So there's some testing we need to do actually around the texting component, believe it or not, because the Google Sheets OAuth API library that it uses also replaces the version that we were using in the texting component for Google Voice. So not that the Google Voice functionality is working all that well to begin with, because Google completely changed how Google Voice works, but we don't want to necessarily make it worse. So there's some testing we need to do, but I imagine that it'll get merged in the next couple of days, hopefully. Becca, important when you have what was the context of that? Sorry. Is that the oh, code coverage, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, also, I mean, we've been pretty lax, to put it lightly, about having people write tests for their code that they submit. Some people have been pretty good about it. Others have not. Yeah, so we have a tool that I've played around with for a number of years now on different projects. It's called Sonar. They renamed it. It's called Sonar Cube now, but it does integrate with a number of different code coverage tools. So it gives you a very nice kind of UI for getting a sense of just what is being tested and what's not being tested in the system. So we've looked at that. It's not great, no surprise. But yeah, I think it's something we have like 15% code coverage in the entire code base. So there's a lot of work to be done, which means, of course, right now that a lot of our testing is all manual. And so that can slow down pull requests, reviews, and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to keep that in mind going forward, because if we can increase our knowledge of what is being tested and what's not being tested, it can give us kind of a stronger sense of what should be merged now versus what needs to get further testing by humans. So, and humans take time to test stuff a lot more than computers. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions? Kind of open, open floor. Let's see. Did anyone ask questions on the community post? Let's see. Oh, doesn't look like anything. All right. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up now then, if there aren't any other questions. And keep an eye on the website and the blog. We're going to be putting up some posts kind of in the next couple days as well, highlighting some of the things about the open source community, about App Inventor's growth in the last year in general. I did an analysis of all the projects in the database as of last September. In terms of like component usage and extensions and things like that. So I've got a draft of that I'm hoping to put up pretty soon. So there's some interesting stuff there that might give you some ideas of kind of how App Inventor is being used, and kind of looking forward to 2021 and kind of continuing to grow the participation of the community. So if one thing we might try to do is have more like technical talks in terms of getting, how do you get set up developing with App Inventor? How is the code broken out? Things like that. To try to just kind of get a better sort of corpus for people to have in terms of the development process and all of that. Yeah, right. Becca noted here in the text that people really love the talks we did during the hackathon. Yeah, so we're hoping to do more of those. I mean, the ones in the hackathon were more about using App Inventor. We'll probably do some of those too, but we also want to make sure that the development side of things, in terms of people who are contributing to GitHub and all that stuff, also have some meaningful content that they can point to. And things like that. So, we'll probably do talks on like how do you build an extension that uses like the Bluetooth Low Energy functionality, for example. So it's an extension based on an extension. there's some new functionality that I put in there over the summer, actually, that would be valuable for people who are doing IoT type things with Bluetooth. So, actually, speaking of Bluetooth, I know there's a new microbit. I don't know if has anyone gotten their hands on one of those? We may need to update our microbit extension, but I was just thinking about that. All right, well, we'll let you go. Thank you everyone for participating. Continue to ask questions. I think it was good to get a little bit more audience participation this time. And we will see you all probably sometime in March, although we may start doing these a little bit more frequently, just so there's more of a dialogue that can happen. Thanks everyone. Yep, and as Peter says, stay safe and have a good holiday. Bye-bye.